Welcome to the Alona Show, where you'll get the real headlines with none of the mercy. We're coming live out of Washington, D.C., and I'm Lucy Kafnov, in for Alona. Now, WikiLeaks is at it again. We're talking torture, executions, war crimes. These are just some of the allegations in the latest slew of documents released this weekend on the Iraq War. And it's being called the largest leak of secret military data in history. We'll tell you some of the shocking details in the war logs and have a debate over whether these leaks put the U.S. military into harm's way. Now, it is quite simply the biggest single leak of secret military data in history. Around 400,000 U.S. military dispatches covering 6 years of the war and occupation of Iraq. Now, the latest revelations from WikiLeaks bring new depth and gut-wrenching detail to the horrors of one of America's most controversial wars. Torture, executions, war crimes, half-truths, and in some cases outright lies by those officials responsible for the war, as well as managing our perception of it. Now, the Iraq war logs reveal the massive scale of civilian deaths. We're talking 109,000 human bodies, 66,000 of them unarmed civilians. More than 800 people shot dead by U.S. troops at checkpoints. The survivors compensated with $2,500 for their lost loved ones. Now, remember how the U.S. politicians and generals maintained that they kept no account of the civilians killed in Iraq? "We don't do body counts," was the quote from General Tommy Franks. Now, if genuine, these accounts expose all that as a massive and sustained lie. Then there's the torture. The Iraq war logs show that getting rid of Saddam didn't eradicate the brutal tendencies of the Iraqi security forces. Detainees were beaten with pipes, knives, cables, electricity, even a cat in the face in one instance. Some even confessed to being terrorists just so they can be shipped to the safety of American control. Now, according to the documents, U.S. forces were under order to turn a blind eye to it all. And if you can't decipher the bitter irony here, let me spell it out for you. This kind of systematic abuse of people under Saddam Hussein was precisely the reason that the United States gave for invading Iraq in the first place. And there's more to talk about than we have time for, so you're going to have to explore these files on your own. I only hope that the Obama administration will take heed and investigate the role that its military played in the horrors described here. If America is ever to regain the respect and credibility it once had on the international stage, it must turn inwards and account for how this was allowed to happen. How we not only allowed but participated in the very human rights abuses that we claimed our invasion would stop. How we killed so many of those people who we came there to protect. And how we bought wholesale an official version of a war that was often too far removed from the actual truth. Now, the Obama administration has lashed out at WikiLeaks for the latest disclosures, accusing the site of endangering U.S. troops. But WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange argues that the disclosures do more harm than good. In an interview with RT this weekend, Assange explained the significance of the latest leak.
It's not good to support things that you do not understand. And this is the most accurate description of a war that has ever been released into the historic record. There is nothing comparable. It is the details of the deaths of 109,000 people, the wounding of some 170,000 people, the detainment of nearly 200,000 people during a course of 6 years. And of course that is only about half the military action that went on during that period, because it's only the US view on things. But even so.
Now, for a closer look at this leak and what it all means, I'm joined by former senior Pentagon correspondent at CNN and blogger for The Line of Departure, Jamie McIntyre, and Pratap Chatterjee, the investigative journalist and senior fellow at the Center for American Progress. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being here and welcome. Now, Pratap, I'm going to start with you. There's so much information in these leaks, from torture to allegations of innocent lives lost. What is the takeaway lesson? What do you walk away with? What impressions do you have from the cumulative effect of these latest leaks?
Remember, these are raw field reports. There are 500,000 of them if you count Afghanistan and Iraq. It gives us a granular view of war, a soldier's view of war. It's not an Iraqi view, an Afghan view. It tells you what the soldiers saw. And what the soldiers heard Sometimes, of course, that's not even necessarily accurate. I mean, they convey something that they witnessed, and that's generally more accurate. Sometimes things they heard, they may not be very accurate. It is the stuff of history, and it has to be filtered, and it has to be understood and analyzed, and that's what WikiLeaks has done. It has handed these documents over to experienced journalists at the New York Times, at The Guardian, at Channel 4, at many outlets, Le Monde, I think, and many of us have gone through many of these documents and come up with some very startling conclusions. The Apache troop that fired on men who wanted to surrender. We have accounts of Blackwater opening fire on people. We have accounts of drone wars. We have many things. We have a secret FRAGO, fragmentary order, which allows soldiers, tells soldiers that they can report, but not intervene in case of human rights abuse. So we've learned a tremendous amount.
Now, Jamie, a blinding flash of the obvious, as you wrote about the previous WikiLeaks leak, or
well, no, you know,
more?
these documents, as I think everyone would agree, really contribute to this more textured and nuanced understanding of what's going on, and they do allow people to weigh what the U.S. government has said publicly and what the U.S. military says publicly against more detailed information. But they are incomplete. They don't have all of the context with them, and they are something that's very susceptible to being overblown if you don't understand the nuance of any particular situation. And if you start analyzing these, again, you know, just like I think with the last release, we haven't seen in the United States a big outcry of people saying, you know, what the government said, it doesn't match up with these documents, because unlike, say, the Pentagon Papers back during the Vietnam War, they don't show a big disconnect between what the government has said officially and what they said.
Well, I mean, what about the simple point of the body counts? I mean, we've heard general after general, politician after politician say that they don't keep track, and these documents.
Well, they don't keep an official track the same way they keep track of the U.S. casualties. And what General Franks was saying in that we don't do body counts thing is that body counts, the number of enemy forces that you've killed, is not a good way to measure whether you're winning the war. And that's one of the lessons of Vietnam. You can kill many enemy fighters, and that doesn't mean you're winning. So when the U.S. military says we don't do body counts, what they mean is we don't use that as a measure of success, of whether we're prevailing. And it is true that it's very hard to keep track of all these civilian casualties, most of which, by the way, and including these new numbers that we see in these reports, are killed by other Iraqis or by outside forces like al-Qaeda fighters. We're not talking about a huge number, huge increase in civilians killed by the U.S. military. Most of the big increase comes from others.
And do you agree? Do you think that this does not reveal a picture of a war different from what the generals and the
actually reveals quite a different war? Now, the Iraq body count have kept track as citizen volunteers in London, and they have documented about 109,000 deaths. By confirming at least two different sources. What the Pentagon did is they have also documented about 109,000 reports. Only about 64,000 correspond. And by a very careful analysis, they've added 15,000 to that 109,000 that each of them have got. It's now 122,000, plus the combatants, the Americans, the security contractors. We're now up to 150,000. The Pentagon's records, as revealed by WikiLeaks, another 192,500 injured. Many of those may have died. So we're looking at very large numbers. This is the beginning point from which history can be documented. This did not exist before. The Pentagon lives in the past. They don't understand human rights. They don't understand how today, with technology, war is going to be reported differently. And they need to understand that if they want to come and they want to say, this is our view of history, they're wrong. Because the truth is out there, and people like WikiLeaks are going to expose it.
Well, one of the reasons they didn't get deeply into this question of how many civilians were killed in Iraq, and obviously it's a large number. You know, not nearly, for instance, as large as the number estimated by the Lancet a few years ago, but clearly larger than the number that the Pentagon acknowledged. One of the reasons they don't do that is because it's very difficult to do. It's subject to debate. And then you have to step back and ask yourself, well, what is the larger question? What does that tell you?
The larger question is death. It's civilian death. And
right.
if your job at the Pentagon is to go there and say, my job is to kill people so I can bring peace to a country, that's just wrong.
See, that's a vast oversimplification of what
you need to do is if somebody dies, whether it was by al-Qaeda or by Blackwater is
or
you
by
write it
suicide
down.
bombers, or
By anybody,
But
you write it down.
What if we say that the larger
that.
question here
Yeah.
is truth? And the biggest thing that stands out to me is, you know, we can get into the details of the deaths. Obviously, there's issues in counting that, et cetera, et cetera. But the bigger issue with the war in Iraq is both how it was sold to the American people, which at the end of the day turned out not to be the exact truth, and also the actual conduct of the war does not seem to add up with a lot of the information that we're getting in leaks, such as what we saw this weekend with WikiLeaks.
Well,
what about that?
Anytime you have the official version of what happened, and then you have a more detailed, granular version from people who were there, you're always going to see a difference. But again, I would disagree that it shows a huge policy difference, a huge difference between what the U.S. policy is and what it's attempting to accomplish and how it's attempting to accomplish it. It does show that war is a dirty, deadly business, and a lot of things go wrong, and a lot of people die, and goals are not accomplished. And the reason for going for the war, by the way, was not what you said, which was Saddam Hussein's human rights abuses. It was the belief that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction, which turned out to be wrong.
Right. Well, I mean, the WikiLeaks information also showed that, yeah, he did have some chemical weapons, but they weren't weapons of mass destruction. And one of the justifications that the Bush administration had made was, this guy's a bad guy, we're going to go in and take him out. So it's not, I mean, that wasn't the
and it wasn't
original purpose of
only
the war,
that they
but
had weapons of mass destruction now, but that they were also going to acquire more, and they were going to be more of a threat. That was a judgment based on intelligence available at the time, which turned out to be incorrect. And we can debate whether that was knowable at the time or whether it was only something that was knowable after the war started.
Well, switching gears a little bit, I wanted to ask both of you, we can start with you. What do you make of this tendency by mainstream outlets to sort of villainize WikiLeaks and focus on Julian Assange, the man, and WikiLeaks, the organization, rife with strife and all kinds of internal issues? Does that sort of detract from the bigger picture?
I absolutely think so. I mean, I think Julian Assange and WikiLeaks have simply exposed or released data that they have vetted that was done by the military themselves. So this is not, Julian Assange hasn't done any reporting. You know, he has simply helped whistleblowers to bring information to the public. So it doesn't really matter at the end of the day what Julian Assange is as a person. What matters at the end of the day is what the military, what the soldiers themselves reported about what they saw. And in many cases, you will find the soldiers report abuses by other soldiers, by their officers, by Iraqi officers, by Al-Qaeda, by a lot of different people. He has been, in this new world, you know, of social media journalism, of data journalism, he has brought the truth to the people.
Well, I would disagree that he brought the truth to the people, but he has been a conduit for these massive leaks, for which people who, and you urged your viewers to go look at the documents themselves, and I would say the same thing. He has been the conduit that has provided this wealth, this treasure trove of material that with sophisticated analysis you could draw your own conclusions about what the truth is. But I think where he goes astray is when he starts characterizing the things themselves. I think it was a big mistake, for instance, to label the video that they posted collateral murder, which implied a judgment, when if you looked at all of the facts in that, it's a lot less clear what was going on.
Well, unlike the time of the Pentagon Papers, I think we're living in a media environment where there's so much competition that you almost have to be a little, exciting when you get information out there just to force people to pay attention. Gentlemen, thank you both so much for being here. I'm sure there's a lot of issues that will remain at question in this subject, but hopefully we'll have you both back soon.
Lucy,
Thank you, Lucy.